was once regarded as a myth by the formidable Roman Empire, dismissed as nothing more than an ancient legend. This perception changed dramatically in 55 BC, when Julius Caesar directed his attention to the enigmatic island and embarked on a journey to its shores. This historic encounter, however, ended in a Roman defeat. Nearly a century later, the Romans achieved success when Emperor Claudius set foot on British soil. They focused on Stonehenge, using the sacred site for their religious practices and rituals. The establishment of Londinium marked Roman control over the land. But what unfolded next in the history of the United Kingdom? To grasp the full story of this intriguing land, we must begin at its origins. The origins of what would become the United Kingdom trace back to the prehistoric Paleolithic period, approximately 950,000 years ago, marking the earliest known evidence of ancient civilization. The first settlers in Britain were hunter-gatherers who migrated from Europe around 8000 BC, now identified as the first Britons. This early population demonstrated one of the first forms of economy, trading native elk, wild cattle, and pigs, while protecting themselves from the wolves and bears that were prevalent in Britain at the time. Over the years, a significant number of tools such as carved stone edges and hand axes have been unearthed. Human remains from this period are exceptionally rare, making it challenging for experts to determine the specific hominid species that inhabited the area. However, the tools suggest that they were likely a subgroup of Homo erectus, such as Homo heidelbergensis. Tracing the movements of Homo erectus is also complex, with early sites discovered being separated by vast distances and many years, complicating the formation of patterns. At one point, Britain was connected to the European mainland, facilitating the spread and relocation of groups across the landmass. As the land shifted and sea levels rose, groups were isolated and left to evolve independently. These early inhabitants relied heavily on hunting and scavenging, evidenced by wooden spears found in Essex, believed to have been crafted around 450,000 years ago. Stone tools often survive, making wooden remains a rare and valuable find for the information they provide. Hand axes would often become worn over time, with flint flakes chipping off. These flakes offer archaeologists a wealth of information, revealing the techniques used in their creation, the complexity of the tools, and the types of stone used. Hand axes were likely used for butchering animal carcasses rather than chopping wood, given the simplicity of the tool and the expertise of the hunters who made many of them. They have been found in large quantities at some ancient sites, indicating that groups frequently returned to certain locations and preferred to make new tools upon arrival rather than carry them during their travels. As tool-making techniques advanced, the Neanderthals in Britain began strategizing their hunting methods to target larger prey, such as woolly rhinos and mammoths, which once roamed the land. The subsequent phase in prehistoric times is known as the Upper Paleolithic era. During this period, humans physically evolved into the modern form we recognize today, retaining only a few traits from our ancient ancestors. This explains the persistence of wisdom teeth, which were once essential for consuming raw foods. During this time, Europe endured extremely harsh and cold conditions due to the last ice age. Many inhabitants migrated to avoid freezing temperatures and to find ample vegetation and animal prey year-round. Limestone gorges offered shelter to those living in Britain, with deep caves and overhangs serving as invaluable camping sites. Approximately 11,300 years ago, Britain began to experience a warming trend, initiating a significant growth phase. Birch and pine trees flourished, along with other forms of greenery, Woodlands featuring oak, hazel, lime, and elm spread across the land, many of which are still abundant today. Certain animals, such as reindeer and horses, remained after the climate warmed, attracting hunters adept at tracking and killing these species. This migration led many hunters to settle in Britain. As the climate continued to warm, inhabitants had to adapt their hunting strategies to target red deer and boar, as other animal species either migrated or became extinct. This shift necessitated the evolution of tools and technology for survival. Around 6,300 years ago, during the Mesolithic period, many groups began establishing seasonal camps to optimize living conditions in response to the changing natural climate. Permanent settlement in one location would deplete resources such as food and wood for fires. Seasonal migration allowed the local habitat to recover, ensuring sustainable hunting upon their return. Coastal sites were often chosen for certain times of the year, leading to a diet rich in fish and mollusks. This dietary shift fostered the development of tools for catching marine prey, expanding human knowledge and curiosity about the ocean. The transition from hunting and gathering occurred around 4100 BC, driven by the arrival of agricultural techniques from the east. This shift was propelled by the population boom during the late Mesolithic period, which rapidly depleted animal resources. The landscape began to change as inhabitants produced mass flint tools equipped with wooden handles to clear land for fields, pastures, and settlements. Barley and emmer wheat were the first main crops, while pigs and cattle were domesticated and bred for meat production rather than immediate slaughter. This move towards self-sufficient settlements led to the construction of the first domestic buildings, including large, narrow wooden structures known as longhouses. Another type of structure was the long barrow, used for storing and respecting the dead. The Neolithic period brought significant changes to Britain in terms of technology, landscape, and settlements. The causeway enclosure became popular, consisting of circular monuments with banks and ditches, forming a ring around the settlement. Structures known as cursus were often built within these circular enclosures, with the longest cursus in Britain measuring an impressive 10 kilometres, or about 33,000 feet. In the realm of hunting, the design of arrowheads evolved significantly among early settlers. Initially, arrowheads were crafted in a leaf shape to enhance their aerodynamics. Over time, these designs transformed into chisel and transverse arrowheads, further refining their effectiveness. This evolution was likely driven by social changes and the exchange of crafting techniques among different groups. The chisel arrowhead, in particular, was easier to produce as it could be glued or bound to an arrow shaft, accelerating the production process. During the Middle Neolithic period, British settlers began to reduce their reliance on hunting wild animals, turning instead to their domesticated livestock. Consequently, arrowheads became less sharp, serving more as a deterrent against other settlements attempting to steal livestock rather than for killing. This shift may have been influenced by increasing social norms that prohibited murder as a form of punishment. Between 2600 and 2200 BC, monumental structures known as henges were constructed, with Stonehenge in Wiltshire, England being the most famous example. While definitive evidence is lacking, it is believed that these henges were used for rituals and astronomical observations. The placement of ditches inside the banks suggests that they were not for defence but rather symbolic. During the late Neolithic period, changes in pottery and tools were evident. Early Neolithic pottery featured round-bottom bowls with necks, but by the late Neolithic, the style had shifted as holding dairy products and stews. As groups gathered and technology advanced rapidly among prehistoric Britons, they transitioned into the next significant era, the Bronze Age. The advent of metalworking and beaker-style pottery marked the beginning of the Bronze Age in Britain around 2200 BC. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was rarer than iron, making it a valuable resource for tools, while gold was predominantly used for jewellery. Tin, also scarce in Europe, was a crucial component of bronze. Since bronze could be cast at lower temperatures than copper, it allowed for the creation of more intricate designs such as daggers, halberds, and axes, which were more durable than their stone predecessors. Bronze's hardness, reinforced by tin at the atomic level, made it superior to copper. Despite the use of bronze, beaker pots continued to be made, with designs and decorations becoming increasingly refined. Intact beaker pots found in burials often contain residues, such as honey from beer, offering insights into ancient craftsmanship. During the Middle Bronze Age, daggers were lengthened, evolving into the first swords in Britain, known as rapiers. As social tensions escalated between different groups, a variety of weapons and shields were developed. Evidence suggests that neighbouring settlements heavily used these weapons, as indicated by the damage they sustained, though some may have been intentionally damaged before being placed in hoards to prevent reuse. Although there is evidence of cremation during the Bronze Age, many human remains were likely scattered or placed in moving water. This is inferred from the scarcity of bones in burial sites, where more bodies were expected. This practice indicates that Bronze Age people had mastered fire and techniques to increase its heat for both cremation and metal casting. During this period, land boundaries emerged, claimed and traded by dominant families. Livestock pens and agricultural fields became integral to daily life, alongside copper mines that provided employment and facilitated rapid advancements in metalworking. A significant site at Great Orme in Llandudno, Wales, supplied 90% of the ore used to produce axes throughout northwest Europe. Around 1000 BC, a shift in climate rendered many areas of Britain uninhabitable, primarily due to colder conditions that stunted crop growth. Regions once ideal for vegetation became wet and boggy, exacerbated by the eruption of the Hekla volcano in Iceland, which obscured much of the sunlight. As the land turned inhospitable, many settlers relocated. Those who remained either repurposed fields for livestock or built elevated walkways and settlements over the wetlands, inadvertently honing their construction skills. The most well-preserved artefacts from this era, including cloth, food in pots, tools, furniture, and wooden objects, were discovered in the peat bogs beneath these settlements. The anaerobic muddy conditions of the bogs ensured these items were preserved for millennia. Towards the end of the Bronze Age, the long, pointed rapier blades evolved into flat blades with full tangs extending into cast handles. Weapons during this period became not only essential for survival, but also an art form. Weapon hoards became less common, likely due to a decrease in value. Artisans, known as founders, began withholding their wares to increase their value, marking the first instance of market strategy in British history. A precursor to the country's economic development, the Iron Age, which began around 1200 BC in the Middle East and Southeast Europe, is renowned for the extensive iron and steel crafting that emerged. Although some settlers experimented with iron smelting towards the end of the Bronze Age, the craft did not flourish until the Iron Age, which significantly accelerated the growth of civilization. The introduction of iron tools and weapons enhanced resilience and longevity, enabling the permanent settlements and advanced tools for agriculture. This period also saw the rise of art, improved farming techniques, religious beliefs, and alphabetic writings in Britain. The European Iron Age began in the Mediterranean and gradually spread towards Central Europe, reaching Northern Europe by 600 BC. The early Iron Age was dominated by the Hallstatt chiefs, who were the elite rulers of the time. This culture introduced the first fortified hill forts where domesticated animals and livestock were raised. These hill forts would later evolve into castles and palaces, serving both defensive purposes and as symbols of familial wealth. However, around 450 BC, the Hallstatt culture declined, and the chiefs lost their power, paving the way for other groups to rise in Europe, including the Mycenaeans, Greeks, Etruscans, Romans, and Celts. These groups used their iron and steel expertise to craft durable weapons and advanced armour, with the Celts becoming the most powerful among them. The Celts, divided into various tribes, spread across Britain. Despite their shared language, they were referred to as Keltoi, the Greek word for barbarians. The Celtic culture began rising as early as 1200 BC, expanding throughout Britain, Ireland, France, and Spain as their population grew. However, they primarily remained in Britain and Ireland, with some of their vocabulary still present in modern languages. Although they were prominent throughout the Iron Age, it wasn't until around 700 BC that the Romans documented them, calling them Gauls, another term for barbarians. Despite their reputation, the Celts were one of the most successful groups in British history, controlling many parts of the continent, including present-day Ireland. The Celts thrived for centuries until the Roman Empire expanded across Europe. Julius Caesar launched a comprehensive attack on the Celts, killing thousands and dismantling their settlements and culture to claim their territories. While Caesar's Roman army failed to invade Britain initially, allowing the Celts to maintain their presence, the Romans' involvement in British history was far from over, with their story just beginning. As the Roman Empire continued its expansion, it eventually conquered most of Britain. Before this conquest, the empire had already dominated the Mediterranean Sea, successfully storming the ancient cities of Carthage and Macedon, and subsequently taking control of Egypt and Syria. After crossing the Alps, the Romans finally reached Albion, the original name for Britain. By the time the Romans arrived, Iron Age settlements in Britain had advanced significantly. These communities boasted thriving agriculture, wooden structures, and large populations. Established trading routes existed between the Britons and the people of Gaul, now known as France and Belgium. These routes facilitated the exchange of wine and the first forms of currency. While Julius Caesar initially failed to conquer the island, his persistence led him to return in 55 and 54 BC, driven by both stubbornness and a keen interest in controlling the ongoing trade. Caesar aimed to disrupt the Belgae trade routes in the English Channel, suspecting that the Britons would aid their friends across the sea. This suspicion turned the Britons into enemies of the Roman Empire. Caesar convinced the Roman Senate to support his invasion of Britain by claiming the land was rich in silver, despite having no evidence to substantiate this claim. At the time, many in the empire considered the island of Albion a myth, a legendary land inhabited by barbaric tribes who engaged in practices that disgusted the Romans, such as drinking milk from animals. Caesar's initial invasion plans failed, forcing the Romans to retreat to avoid defeat. Undeterred, Caesar returned with 5 legions, enabling him to cross the Thames River and negotiate with the Briton chieftain Cassivellaunus. This meeting resulted in a peace treaty, allowing Caesar to return to mainland Europe to address a rebellion and a failed harvest threatening starvation. Caesar never returned to Britain, and after a civil war, the Republic crumbled under the rule of Emperors Augustus and Caligula, who continued to expand their empire in Gaul. Although they eyed the barbarians across the Channel, the timing wasn't right for an invasion beyond symbolic gestures. In 43 AD, however, Emperor Claudius sailed across the sea with 4 legions, led by Aulus Plautius. Landing at Richborough on the east coast of Kent, the invasion of Britain commenced. Despite spending only 16 days on the island, Claudius returned to Rome in 44 AD, hailed as a hero. Although the emperor departed, the empire continued its invasion, swiftly capturing the territory of the Catuvellauni, a Celtic tribe state, and expanding north and west. By 60 AD, much of Wales was under Roman control. Roman kingdoms emerged in modern-day Norfolk and other regions, with Vespasian, who would later become emperor, sending his legion to the southwest to conquer tribal settlements. During this period, cities like Londinium, later known as London, were established. Despite the Romans appearing as an unstoppable force, the Britons continued to resist. Caraticus, a member of a Celtic tribe, managed to persuade groups in Wales to fight the Romans. Although he was captured, he escaped and fled to the Brigantes, a region ruled by ancient Britons. However, the Queen of the Brigantes chose to hand him over to the Romans as a gesture of newfound loyalty. Caraticus and his family were sent to Rome as prisoners, but surprisingly, Claudius spared their lives. Boudica, the ally of Rome and wife of Prasutagus, the client king of the Iceni tribe, led a formidable revolt against the empire following her husband's death. Prasutagus had willed half of his kingdom to Rome and the other half to Boudica. However, Rome was unwilling to share power with someone they deemed a traitor and decided to seize the entire kingdom. Determined to resist, Boudica marshalled her forces and marched on Londinium, where towns were plundered and burned. Roman accounts claim that 70,000 Romans were killed during this uprising. Although Boudica and her army were ultimately defeated by the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, Boudica is believed to have taken her own life with poison rather than face capture. Subsequently, the Romans crushed the Druid stronghold at Anglesey, targeting them for their oppositional religious beliefs. This period marked a significant shift in Roman rule in Britain, culminating in the replacement of the governor with Trebellius Maximus, who implemented major changes in governance. Over time, the Britons assimilated into Roman culture, and previously devastated towns and settlements, including London, were rebuilt. London became the Roman capital in Britain, taxes were introduced, mining techniques improved, and agricultural production of livestock and grain surged. The trade industry, including slave trade, flourished. During this era, an extensive network of roads was constructed, connecting key locations such as London, York, and the Welsh border. This innovation fostered valuable trade networks and enhanced the prosperity of the capital. The Romans continued their conquests, moving into northern Wales and launching an invasion of Ireland. They further embedded their culture in Britain, constructing amphitheatres, Roman baths, and teaching Latin. By 130 AD, formidable military garrisons were established across the continent, and territories governed by so-called barbarian groups, like the Balkans, were enlisted to support Roman expansion. Britain was eventually divided into Britannia Superior and Britannia Inferior to facilitate more efficient governance. However, the Roman Empire's expansion attracted attention from other enemies. Britain faced a barrage of attacks from the Picts of Scotland, the Scots of Ireland, and the Saxons from Germany. A period of rebellion temporarily separated Britain from Roman control until it was recaptured in 296 AD. By the late 4th century, with the rise of Christianity and dwindling food resources, the Roman Empire's grip on Europe weakened. As the last emperors withdrew, British cities were left to fend for themselves, leading to the creation of local governments that replaced Roman magistrates. Despite Britain's official separation from Rome, Roman culture persisted and significantly influenced the country's development. In the ensuing decades, religious conflicts between heretics and Christians erupted. Saxon raids on English coastal cities increased, and Europe plunged into what is known as the Dark Ages. Britain fragmented into smaller kingdoms, entering a period of regression. Although Britain faced formidable enemies, their most significant challenge came unexpectedly. In 793 AD, Norse seafarers from Scandinavia reached Britain's shores. Their first major violent act was the plundering of a Christian monastery, marking the beginning of the Viking Age, which lasted for 300 years. As more longboats arrived, the Viking invaders raided coastal settlements across England, Scotland, and Ireland. Eventually, Ivar the Boneless, the son of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, decided to establish a permanent presence on the island. This group of invaders became known as the Great Heathen Army. In 865 AD, they arrived in East Anglia, one of the 4 kingdoms of Britain, marking a new chapter in the island's tumultuous history. Fearing the formidable Norse warriors, Edmund the Martyr, king of East Anglia, offered them provisions, horses, and shelter in an attempt to avoid violence, pillaging, and conquest. Despite these efforts, Edmund was ultimately defeated, captured, and likely tortured before being killed. Within a few years, the Vikings successfully captured York, the capital of Northumbria, one of the 4 major kingdoms. By 870, the Vikings had taken control of all the kingdoms except for Wessex. At this critical juncture, Danish warlord Guthrum the Old led the Norse army, while Alfred the Great ruled Wessex. The two forces clashed in the bloody Battle of Edington in 878, where Alfred emerged victorious. This victory led to the Treaty of Wedmore, an unusual agreement that required Guthrum to be baptised, with Alfred standing as his godfather. The treaty also mandated that the Vikings leave Wessex and never return. Soon after, another agreement was forged, establishing boundaries and trade routes between the two factions. Over the years, Viking customs took root in the territories they controlled, including London. This area came to be known as Danelaw, with the towns of Derby, Leicester, Lincoln, Nottingham, and Stamford becoming significant centres under Viking control. These 5 boroughs were governed by Danish armies under the authority of a Jarl, a Viking elite. For nearly a century, Vikings and Anglo-Saxons coexisted peacefully, engaging in trade, work, and intermarriage. Many modern English words are derived from Old Norse, such as sky from sk, ugly, girl, husband from husbandi, gift, egg from aeg, and Thursday from Thursday. The Vikings' strong belief in a legal system contributed words like law and wrong to the English language, reflecting their commitment to defining unacceptable behaviour according to their cultural standards. During the peace, Alfred the Great fortified his kingdom with defences and forts. After her husband's death in 911, Alfred's daughter, Ethelflaed, utilised these strongholds to wage war against the Vikings. She assumed control of Mercia, earning the title Lady of the Mercians. Over time, the 5 boroughs under Viking rule were defeated, culminating in the expulsion of the last Norse king. done with the land they considered home. In 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard and his Viking warriors returned, with Sweyn becoming the first Danish king of England. After his death, his son Canute the Great took over until his passing in 1035. Viking rule finally ended when King Harold defeated King Harald Hardrada of Norway in 1066 at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. This time, the Viking invaders were expelled from England permanently, though their legacy endures in the DNA of their descendants and the cultural influences they left behind. The Middle Ages and the Viking Age overlap, with this period starting around the year 400 and lasting over 1,000 years, ending in 1485. This era is divided into three sections: the early, high and late Middle Ages. We've already discussed the early Middle Ages, dominated by the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. Both of these groups fell in 1066 after the defeat of the Norse ruler King Harald Hardrada and Edward the Confessor, who was defeated by the Normans during the Battle of Hastings. Although the Anglo-Saxon era ended, they made significant advancements in their settlements during their time. Families began constructing single houses where multiple generations would live together, from the youngest children to their grandparents. These homes were built from wood with thatched roofs to keep them dry and warm. The houses were clustered together, with a grand hall serving as the community's focal point. The centre of each home was known as the hearth, a fire used for cooking, providing light and keeping the family warm. The Anglo-Saxons not only improved their homes, but also revolutionised agriculture. Farming was the primary occupation during this period. Agricultural work included cultivating crops, breeding and raising animals, preparing and treating livestock, and clearing trees to create farmland and construct new buildings. Children also contributed, herding cows and sheep with the help of trained dogs. The Anglo-Saxon communities boasted skilled professionals such as blacksmiths, who crafted weapons and tools, carpenters who built furniture, carts and bowls, cobblers who made shoes from leather, and jewellers who used precious metals to create beautiful items for trade with the wealthy. Notably, the Anglo-Saxons invented the plough, revolutionising farming. They discovered that horses, when tamed, were more efficient than oxen at pulling ploughs through soil, significantly speeding up the farming process. However, their era ended with the rise of the Anglo-Normans. The Norman dynasty began with William the Conqueror, who ruled England until his death on September 9th, 1087. William's invasion of England was a monumental achievement, with even the mighty Roman Empire struggling to fully conquer the land. This success hailed William as a hero, garnering attention throughout Europe. During his reign, the landscape of the continent transformed dramatically. The first stone-built Norman castle was constructed in Wales, soon followed by others across the island. The Normans invaded much of Wales, building castles to establish strongholds against any opposition. They introduced magnificent stone architecture to England, exemplified by the stunning Canterbury Cathedral, completed in 1077, the Tower of London, finished in 1078, Oxford University, founded in 1096, and the commissioning of the Domesday Book, which recorded land valuations throughout England and parts of Wales. While William was revered by the Normans as a great ruler, the feudal system he implemented drastically altered the lives of Anglo-Saxon landowners and farmers, reducing them to farmers working under the governance of those in power. They were stripped of their heritage, hard work, and wealth. The feudal system allocated a quarter of the land to William the Conqueror, another quarter to the Church of Rome, and the remainder to loyal followers of William, who were rewarded with high status in return. These individuals individuals were entrusted with the responsibility of raising an army from the local populace whenever William required it. However, this task was considered beneath the nobility, so they delegated the recruitment and training duties to knights. Peasant farmers, from whom the crown had taken lands, were also compelled to swear allegiance to these knights. The advancements in agriculture brought about a greater variety of crops and foods. The Normans developed a taste for spiced food, frequently using caraway seeds, ginger, cardamom, pepper, and nutmeg in their cooking. During Christmas celebrations, these spices were added to traditional winter meals, with the affluent hosting grand feasts featuring pheasants, peacocks, wild boar, jellies, and custards. Common foods consumed by peasants include salted or pickled items such as pickled herrings, bacon, and vegetable broths, which had longer shelf lives. While the nobility enjoyed wine with their meals, peasants drank strong ales. The High and Late Middle Ages, spanning the 11th to the 13th centuries, brought significant changes that negatively affected the country. The feudal system led to major social shifts in class structures, while rebellions caused widespread upheaval. The Renaissance introduced artistic expression and storytelling, providing future playwrights like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe with the means to narrate political and romantic tales inspired by real-life events. This era has been romanticised in literature and modern media, depicting it as a time of fair maidens, lavish feasts, majestic castles, and knights gallantly riding into battle. In reality, life was harsh and perilous for most people. After several of William the Conqueror's sons took the throne, his grandson Stephen of Blois became king in 1135, igniting a major civil war in Britain known as the Anarchy, which lasted from 1138 to 1154. The conflict was driven by Stephen's cousin, Empress Matilda, who believed the crown rightfully belonged to her. This period was extremely challenging for everyone in Britain, from the wealthy nobility to the humble peasants. Suspicion and desperation led to oppression and mistreatment. Many innocent people were tortured and interrogated for information, while others resorted to theft to provide for their families. Starvation was rampant, leaving many families destitute. The Civil War ended with Stephen's death in 1154, when Empress Matilda's son, Henry II, ascended the throne. Henry II's reign was relatively peaceful, strengthened by his friendship with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Together, they wielded significant power over England's people and their religion. Unfortunately, their friendship soured, culminating in Henry ordering Becket's murder inside Canterbury Cathedral. During the 12th century, personal freedom was complex, with some men tied to land ownership and obliged to pay the lord, while others paid rent but owned no land. Some owed service to a master, while also paying rent for their land. Failure to pay taxes resulted in answering to an overseeing master. Non-free individuals, known as serfs, could gain freedom, but another escape route was to live in another borough for a year. However, if caught before then, the lord had the right to punish and imprison the fugitive. King John, who ascended the throne in 1199, is remembered as one of the cruelest rulers in English history. He was greedy, violent, and tyrannical, instilling fear in his subjects. He raised taxes to hire mercenaries to maintain control. His wrath spared no one, not even the Pope. In 1208, John refused to accept Stephen Langton as the Archbishop of Canterbury after Pope Innocent III disregarded the king's suggested candidates. The church bells of Britain rang out their warning, and the church ceased burying people, but King John still refused to accept Stephen Langton as Archbishop. Consequently, the Pope excommunicated King John, absolving all English stripping him of his power. This blow incited a revolt within the country, and the King of France seized the chaos to challenge England's rule. Amidst this turmoil, King John was forced to sign a pivotal charter, the Magna Carta, agreeing that the country would adhere to numerous laws and principles of justice, 4 of which remain in effect today. With no other options and facing a full-scale French invasion, King John eventually accepted Stephen Langton as the Archbishop of Canterbury. This decision restored allegiance to the king, enabling them to defeat the French forces on the coast of Flanders, located in Belgium. In 1265, King Henry III staunchly opposed the idea of citizens having a say in the kingdom's governance. The Earl of Leicester, Simon de Montfort, thought otherwise and challenged the king, while the Magna Carta laid the groundwork for the country's prominent laws. Simon de Montfort established the first English Parliament, electing representatives to speak for the common people. Just as today, members of Parliament had their expenses covered. By 1298, control over taxation was granted to Parliament, strengthening the institution. One of the most devastating pandemics in British history was the Black Plague, which ravaged the population in 1347. Over 200 million people died from the disease across Europe, with 1.5 million casualties in Britain. The initial outbreak in England lasted 3 years, ending in 1350, but the plague re-emerged multiple times over the next 50 years. Originally thought to be spread by rats, it is now believed to have been an airborne disease that killed victims within days. Peasants suffered the most, living in close quarters with poor sanitation. The overwhelming number of deaths left rotting corpses piled in the streets, with the primitive science of the time unable to provide a cure or prevention. With so many peasant workers dying, finding people to tend fields and grow crops became increasingly difficult, leading to starvation and the collapse of entire villages. Desperately in demand, many peasants took advantage of the situation, moving around the country to find higher paying positions. The government disliked this newfound mobility and sided with those willing to pay more. Efforts to restrict peasants from seeking better paid jobs led to the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, in which the lower classes violently united to abolish poll taxes and wage caps and end the lords' control over them and their property. Another significant event of the Middle Ages was the War of the Roses, a brutal conflict between the House of Lancaster and the House of York for the English throne. This war began in 1455 and lasted until 1487, with battles occurring throughout Britain. The bloodiest battle took place on March 29th, 1461, in Towton, Yorkshire, where it is believed over 50,000 people fought and 28,000 soldiers were killed in a single day. The war concluded when the last Yorkist claimant to the throne, Richard III, was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, ushering in the Tudor era. The Tudor period, lasting from 1485 to 1603, saw the unification of Wales and England. Although much of the Renaissance occurred during the Middle Ages, the rebirth of art, culture and literature, alongside Henry VIII's contentious disputes with the Pope, are more closely associated with the Tudor period. When Henry VIII married his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, they had 6 children, but only one survived, Mary of England. The lack of a male heir led Henry to seek an annulment from Pope Clement VII to marry Anne Boleyn. After the Pope refused, Henry VIII separated the Church of England from papal control, declaring himself its supreme head in 1534. He married Anne Boleyn, later having her executed for treason, a fate that also befell his 5th wife. Catherine Howard in 1542. Henry VIII married 6 times in total, though not all his wives met such grim ends. This period marked the beginning of the English Reformation, which continued after Henry's death, with his son Edward VI and his regents purging the Church of England of papal rituals and practices. This resulted in the execution by burning of 300 individuals who refused to convert to Catholicism, a grim chapter in English history now referred to as the Marian persecution. Queen Mary's fervent religious policies posed significant challenges not just to the nobility, but also due to her gender. As the first woman to ascend to the throne in her own right, many influential nobles urged her to marry a Protestant to mend relations with her subjects. Definitely, Mary married Spanish Prince Philip II in 1554. However, the union failed to produce heirs despite numerous attempts. On her deathbed, Mary named her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth as her successor. Elizabeth reigned from 1558 to 1603, significantly impacting the country, as Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth had to earn her subjects' loyalty, which she did through her intelligence and charismatic personality, leading to a prosperous reign. However, her era was not without challenges, including Catholic plots against her life, a papal attack, and her choice to remain single. Despite these obstacles, she gained admiration and nicknames such as Gloriana, Good Queen Bess, and the Virgin Queen. Her death in 1603 marked the end of the Tudor period. Before the Tudors, agriculture dominated the country's economy, with 90% of the population engaged in farming, a tough life with low life expectancy. The age of exploration shifted focus to trade, leading to a boom in coal, tin, iron, and lead mining, significantly enriching the country. Despite this, famine and poverty persisted in Tudor England. In 1530, harsh laws against beggars were abolished, allowing licensed begging, which led to an increase in vagrants. A 1547 law mandated 2 years of imprisonment for begging, later revised in 1550 to flogging. Elizabeth I's Poor Law of 1601 provided tax relief and other support for the poor. The Tudor period saw a preference for physical punishments over imprisonment, including flogging and public humiliation in stocks. Serious crimes like murder still warranted execution. Nobles faced beheading, while commoners were hanged, often attracting large public audiences. Education gained importance during the Tudor era, with educationalist Richard Mulcaster advocating that boys' education was paramount. Wealthy boys attended grammar schools and universities, while girls were expected to become skilled in household duties. Eventually, girls gained limited educational rights, focusing on reading and writing. Local schools were later established for both boys and girls. Leisure activities also flourished in the Tudor period. People enjoyed tennis, football, jousting events, and gambling. The affluent played chess and card games like Primero and Noddy, the latter being a precursor to cribbage. After Elizabeth I's death in 1603, marking the end of the Tudor reign, James VI ascended the throne. James, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who had been executed for treason and became a Catholic martyr, resisted reversing the Reformation despite hopes from English Catholics. Disappointed Catholics plotted to assassinate him by blowing up the Houses of Parliament. In 1605, Guy Fawkes and conspirators placed gunpowder beneath the House of Lords, but their plan was thwarted on November 5th, leading to their execution by hanging, drawing, and quartering. This event is commemorated annually as Bonfire Night with fireworks on November 5th. Despite the assassination attempt, James generally brought peace, uniting England and Scotland. His son Charles succeeded him in 1625. Charles, a staunch Anglican and art lover, ruled without Parliament for a time. However, financial needs forced him to recall Parliament, but he resisted sharing power, leading to a civil war in August 1642. The conflict escalated, resulting in millions of deaths over 9 years. The civil wars compelled many castles, unused for military purposes since the Middle Ages, to become active once again. Numerous castles were besieged by opposing factions seeking strategic strongholds. In 1647, King Charles was defeated by Parliament's army, commanded by Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell. Imprisoned at Carisbrooke Castle, Charles engaged in peace negotiations, but secretly plotted a second civil war, which erupted a year after his capture. This rebellion ultimately led to his execution in 1649. The beheading of a king shocked both Britain and Europe, prompting future Charles Tone to attempt an invasion with Scottish support. This invasion failed, and Charles narrowly escaped death by hiding in an oak tree at Boscobel in Shropshire. The execution of the king weakened both governmental and church powers, fostering the rise of radical ideas often disseminated through pamphlets. New religious sects began preaching about the second coming of Christ, spreading these beliefs throughout the country. Oliver Cromwell, assuming the title of Lord Protector, ruled the Commonwealth of England, Scotland and Ireland. Despite his radical religious views, Cromwell permitted the practice of all religions. He maintained control through his army until his death, after which his forces weakened, allowing Charles II to return and rule in 1660. Charles II's 25-year reign brought significant changes to art, architecture, daily life, and leisure. Theatres experienced a revival, and remarkable scientific discoveries were made, such as the creation of matches using phosphorus-coated wooden splints. However, his reign also saw several disasters, including the Great Plague of 1665 and the Great Fire of London in 1666, which started in a small bakery. Despite heavy criticism regarding his Catholic brother James's succession, James II eventually became king. James II's defence of the throne against his illegitimate Protestant brother, the Duke of Monmouth, made him unpopular due to the harsh trials of the rebels and his policies. Eventually, William of Orange and James's daughter, Mary, invaded England, causing James to flee. William and Mary were subsequently crowned king and queen, marking a peaceful period. Mary's sister Anne ascended the throne in 1702, noted for her victory over Louis XIV and the Act of Union, which initiated the formation of Great Britain. While much has been said about the monarchy and the elite, who were literate and documented their lives, what was life like for ordinary Britons during the Stuart era? Most common people were poor, living in dire conditions, exacerbated by population growth, leading to widespread poverty and starvation. Poor laws, first introduced by Elizabeth I a century earlier, were implemented to assist the nation's poorest. Many workers had masters who provided lodging and wages. Vagrancy became a significant issue, with the impoverished forced to beg or seek charity from family and neighbours. Many destitute individuals opted to travel to the New World in search of better lives and financial opportunities. Although the early Stuart period was marked by hardship, conditions improved toward its end. The poor primarily focused on securing their next meal. During food shortages, people turned to the harvest industry. Soldiers awaiting payment during the Civil War often resorted to stealing crops and livestock exacerbating starvation. The working class subsisted on legume-based diets, while the affluent indulged in rich meats and sweet desserts, leading to illnesses such as diabetes and hemorrhoids. Despite widespread poverty, many people held jobs to support their families. Merchants and shop owners prospered, allowing them to flee London during the plague outbreak. Occupations included shoemakers, blacksmiths, tailors, saddlecrafters, and glovers. Street vendors sold various goods, from oysters to furniture, and offered services such as shoe shining and prostitution. Farm workers were responsible for milking cows, collecting eggs, tilling fields, and tending livestock. During this era, as in previous ones, gender roles were strictly defined. Girls were expected to obey their fathers, brothers, husbands, and eventually their sons. Wives and mothers were responsible for managing and cleaning the household, preparing meals, and raising children. Wealthier women could sometimes avoid marriage and its associated duties, while poorer women often worked as servants, wet nurses, or midwives. Tragically, many women only gained freedom through widowhood. In terms of relationships, aristocratic families arguably faced more challenges than commoners, as they were often compelled to marry for political or financial reasons rather than love. Marriage was so significant in Stuart Britain that a 1604 Act declared that men who deserted their families or committed bigamy would be labelled as rogues and punished accordingly. A notable case involved Thomas Middleton, who had to prove in court that he was only married to one woman. In the latter part of the Stuart era, William Petty published a document called Political Arithmetic, which discussed the workforce in England, including those in agriculture and manufacturing. Petty expressed concern over the scarcity of gold and silver and the nation's increasing poverty. He criticised the focus on Ireland, Scotland, and America as burdensome and unbeneficial. While this view was harsh, it was shared by many who believed England had overextended its resources, leading to widespread suffering. By the early 17th century, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland were unified with England, and in 1707, Queen Anne formally enacted the Acts of Union. Life expectancy during the Stuart period was significantly shorter than today, with high infant mortality rates. Childbirth was perilous for both mother and child due to the lack of modern medicines and treatments. Many women succumbed to trauma, pain, or infections post-childbirth. It is estimated that 25 out of every 1,000 women died during childbirth in the Stuart era. Other common causes of death included worms, plague, dysentery, and an illness known as griping in the guts, which caused severe diarrhea and stomach pain. Poor personal hygiene contributed to the prevalence of parasites like fleas and lice across all social classes, as well as common intestinal worms transmitted through contaminated food. In their leisure time, Stuart period people enjoyed dancing, singing, and live music in music halls and other venues. While the upper classes attended theatres, common folk engaged in betting on cockfighting and dogfighting. Public executions, another form of entertainment, drew large crowds to town squares. The Stuart era saw an influx of foreign food and drinks into England, thanks to global trade routes via road and sea, introducing previously unseen goods. These included North American furs, Chinese tea, and Indian spices. British palates began to change, welcoming these exotic ingredients. By 1633, bananas appeared in markets, and the first coffee houses and tea rooms opened, where people gathered to discuss politics and business. Initially, coffee was considered a man's drink, barring women from coffee houses. women frequented tea rooms, while hot chocolate was available to the upper classes of both genders. The 18th century, known as the Georgian era, witnessed the Industrial Revolution's rise, characterised by steam power, canals, and large-scale manufacturing. Workshops remained small, with thousands of operations like textile workers spinning, weaving, dyeing cloth, and repairing clothing. Specific regions specialised in industries such as metal production in the Midlands, mining in the northeast, and glasswork in the West Midlands. Technological advancements transformed agriculture and industry, increasing food production, although affordability remained an issue for the poor. Foreign workers and vagabonds provided cheap labour, causing mass unemployment, particularly in rural villages. This led many country dwellers to relocate to towns and cities for work. These individuals were absorbed into growing factories, boosting manufacturing and technological development. However, limited power sources slowed production, with many businesses relying on water wheels, windmills, and horses. The introduction of Thomas Newcomen's steam-driven piston engine revolutionised industries, enabling increased workflow, water pumping from mines, goods transportation via trains, and powering large textile mills. By the late 19th century, about 2,000 steam engines were in use in Britain. The Derby family of Shropshire redefined iron manufacturing, producing stronger metals ideal for machinery and large tools. Steam engines also improved coal mining efficiency, making coal one of the nation's most valuable industries. In 1769, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame for large-scale textile spinning. Soon after, James Hargreaves' spinning jenny simplified cotton spinning, and Edmund Cartwright's power loom in 1780 continued this innovation, making cheap clothing accessible to all. As steam industries evolved, so did the businesses using them. Factories proliferated, supplying goods and materials globally. These factories provided unprecedented employment opportunities. Richard Arkwright's Nottingham cotton factories employed nearly 600 workers at their peak, while some Birmingham factories employed nearly 1,000 workers in the 1770s. Even children were employed, as their small hands were suitable for intricate tasks like making buckles, buttons, and locks. Many of these businesses were extremely hazardous environments where workers endured poor treatment. Factories were often compared to prisons, with physical punishment for mistakes or lack of effort. Workhouses and orphanages sent children to labour in factories and mines, exposing them to significant dangers. Some children fainted from heat, while others got caught in rapidly moving machinery as they tried to maintain it. The canal systems developed to transport coal throughout the country also created numerous jobs. Though initially limited, these canals were crucial. For instance, the Duke of Bridgewater's canal connecting Worsley to Manchester halved coal prices within weeks. With the success of existing canals, the government commissioned more. By 1815, Britain had over 2,000 miles of canals, moving thousands of tons of precious metals, coal, and goods on horse-drawn barges. However, the focus on canals left roads in disrepair, many flooded or overgrown. This hindered wagon and cart transport, complicating food deliveries. To address this, the government passed the Turnpike Acts, enabling the construction of new toll roads for funding their maintenance. Led by engineers like John McAdam and Thomas Telford, road networks expanded across the country in the 1780s. These improved roads revitalised trade, making it more efficient. A stagecoach could travel from Edinburgh to London in just 2 days, a journey that previously took nearly 2 weeks. This was revolutionary at the time, and further boosted Britons developed a peculiar fascination with criminals, who were often depicted as heroes in newspapers and pamphlets. Stories of daring crimes turned highwaymen into celebrities. Figures like Jack Sheppard, whose public hanging in 1724 drew 200,000 spectators, and John Rann, who was celebrated after being acquitted of theft, became legends. However, the rise in crime worried many, leading to calls for improved criminal investigations and punishments, which eventually contributed to the development of the modern police force. In the early days, crime punishment was largely the victim's responsibility, with investigations handled by them. Each parish had 2 constables, elected volunteers who worked alongside their day jobs, often paying others to fulfill their duties. Later, paid watchmen, known as Charlies in London, began patrolling streets, conducting investigations and making arrests. Despite their efforts, many considered them ineffective, prompting demands for a more robust system, which led to the establishment of professional forces in the 1750s. In 1751, Henry Fielding founded the Bow Street Runners, the first armed men to conduct public investigations and arrests. Local magistrates judge suspects without jury input, leading to many wrongful convictions and politically motivated imprisonments. These officials were volunteers from influential society members, often lacking legal knowledge and seeking power rather than justice. English writer Horace Walpole remarked that the greatest criminals were often the officers of justice, highlighting widespread corruption, including bribery and negligence. Serious crimes like rape and murder were tried in Crown courts, located in major towns or at the Old Bailey. Trials were daunting for commoners, with the stench of unwashed criminals masked by scented flowers and herbs to prevent disease spread. Proceedings were conducted in Latin, confusing many suspects. Criminal defences were not introduced until later in the Georgian period, leaving witnesses to be examined by judges and jury members. If officials disliked a suspect's character, they could be found guilty without all facts being considered. Trials were expedited, with multiple cases handled in a single day. In the early 1800s, courts operated under the Bloody Code, listing 200 crimes punishable by execution. These ranged from treason, rape, and murder to lesser offences like theft, poaching, and vandalism. While many crimes meriting death resulted in imprisonment, the threat of execution instilled fear. Public hangings were gruesome spectacles, drawing large crowds. Though seen as entertainment by some, these events aimed to deter crime by showcasing the severe consequences. Until 1783, hangings at Tyburn in Middlesex occurred 8 times a year, often with up to 20 criminals executed simultaneously. Those condemned faced a 3-mile journey in a cart to the gallows, amid crowds hurling insults and objects. Once at the wooden scaffold, nooses were placed around their necks and trapdoors released. Post-execution, white doves were released as a sign of respect, followed by a moment of silence. Many convicts were transported to American and Australian colonies for hard labour. Other penalties included heavy fines, flogging, whipping, and branding with a hot iron. These punishments were public spectacles, with the crowd pelting offenders with rotten produce. By the end of the Georgian period, lifelong imprisonment in houses of correction was also common. The 19th century, continuing the Georgian era's industrial advancements, experienced exponential growth that persisted into the Victorian era. Industries and urbanisation soon overshadowed rural Victorian Britain's agriculture, causing a cultural shock. The Victorian era, spanning from 1837 to the early 20th century, saw Britain's population double between 1801 and 1871 due to increased work opportunities from the Industrial Revolution, allowing larger families to be supported. Migration within Britain swelled the population, though many also emigrated. Numerous individuals sought a better life in the American colonies. The Irish potato famine of 1845 led to mass Irish migration, and workers from Ireland, Scotland, and rural England flocked to industrial cities, joined by Jewish migrants from Europe and Russia. Although working conditions for children were dire, legislative efforts by Michael Sadler and the Earl of Shaftesbury led to reforms that improved safety in factories and mines and ended slavery within the British Empire. Compulsory education for children under 10 facilitated the rise of skilled labour among common people. The police force became more organised and efficient, leading to significant prison reforms. Despite persistent social class divides, increased social mobility and financial retention improved many lives. Victorian entrepreneurs capitalised on opportunities, amassing wealth and building large homes staffed by domestic servants. By the 1880s, 1.25 million Britons were employed as domestics, more than in any other industry. This period marked a shift away from a hierarchy dominated by royalty and nobility, heralding new social changes. The working class gained the right to vote in 1918, with women's suffrage following in 1930. After the American Revolutionary War in 1776, Britain lost its American empire, redirecting its focus to India. During the Victorian era, imperial expansion continued, opening new trade routes and sparking conflicts. The 1851 Great Exhibition showcased industrial and technological marvels, cementing the British Empire's dominance in trade and military power. The Empire's vast reach led to the saying, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." Victorian leisure activities flourished, with holidays, seaside trips, museums, theatres, sports, and music halls becoming highly popular. Better education and opportunities allowed the middle class to enter skilled professions. However, conditions for the poor remained dire. Middle-class homes evolved, featuring iron cooking ranges that not only cooked food efficiently, but also heated water tanks. Gas-powered geysers delivered hot water to bathrooms, eliminating the need for maids to carry hot water upstairs. Coffee shops, once hubs for the affluent and politically minded, were replaced by offices communicating via the revolutionary telegraph system. This advancement, further enhanced by the 1877 invention of the telephone, facilitated global trade. In 1834, English scientist and inventor Henry Fox Talbot created the first photographs, known as sun pictures. These quickly gained popularity and were sold as cartes de visite, small photographs often used as visiting cards. Among the most popular subjects were Queen Victoria and her children, marking the first time many people saw their queen outside of official portraits. At the Great Exhibition, George Jennings showcased his innovative lavatories, called halting stations, which were more sanitary than the previous practice of relieving oneself in secluded street corners. This led to the establishment of public lavatories, with a men's room built in Fleet Street in 1852 and a women's lavatory on the Strand. Thomas Crapper later developed the flush mechanism and invented the U-bend. Contrary to popular belief, the term crap did not originate from his name, but from the Dutch word krappen, meaning to separate, and the old French word crapper, meaning waste or rejected matter. Manchester became a hub for cotton manufacturing due to its humid climate, essential for cotton production. However, factories factories were still filled with dust and cotton fibres, causing respiratory illnesses among workers. The large, unsafe machinery led to many accidents, including women being scalped and workers' limbs being crushed. Children were often employed to clear blockages or replace parts, leading to further injuries. Meanwhile, landowning gentry profited immensely from coal mining as steam-powered industries increased demand. Despite mining's contribution to the economy, conditions underground were abysmal. Children were employed to haul wagons from the coal face to the shaft, a task considered too costly and unruly for horses. This dangerous and strenuous work posed risks of mine collapses. The extreme heat in mines meant workers wore minimal clothing and drank beer to stay hydrated, as water quality was poor and often led to diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, and typhoid. In 1815, Sir Humphrey Davy's invention of the safety lamp enabled deeper mining operations. Improved ventilation techniques followed, though it wasn't until 1848 that compressed air systems were introduced. Child labour under the age of 12 was banned in 1860, yet the workforce in mining grew from 200,000 to 500,000 in Britain. Coal production soared from 30 million tonnes in 1836 to 44 million tonnes by 1880. By 1850, regulations limited working hours to 10 per day, abolished night work, and introduced lighting and ventilation standards, enhancing miners' safety. Nonetheless, mining remained perilous until the 1900s. A common practice was to pay workers with tokens, redeemable only at certain shops, leading to inflated prices and poor quality goods. The Truck Act of 1831 aimed to abolish this practice, though its eradication took time. Despite its industrial triumphs, the British Empire's achievements led to its territories seeking independence, inspired by their own aspirations for success. Meanwhile, the United States was rapidly advancing, establishing its own legacy in technology and innovation. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, in 1914, triggered the July Crisis, with Austria-Hungary blaming Serbia. This escalated into war on July the 28th, 1914, as Austria-Hungary, along with other countries, declared war on Serbia. Britain joined what became the First World War, marking a shift from the monarchy and industrial revolution to the development of advanced weaponry and strategic warfare, resulting in unprecedented casualties. Trench warfare led to massive loss of life, with 16 million soldiers and civilians perishing by the war's end. Britain's economy relied heavily on its industrial and agricultural sectors, with industries converting to munitions production under government compulsion, and agriculture providing essential food supplies as imports dwindled due to enemy threats. During World War I, young men were drafted into the army, while women took on roles in factories, producing bullets and uniforms, and working on farms. Women also served as nurses and caregivers, supporting the war effort as casualties mounted. Although the soldiers on the front lines fought for victory, their success relied heavily on the contributions of those back home. At the war's outset, miners were urged not to enlist because their coal production was vital for the war. However, as the conflict progressed, miners were conscripted as tunnellers, tasked with the perilous job of digging tunnels to plant explosives under enemy trenches and placing landmines on the battlefield. The Germans were initially better prepared for trench warfare, giving them an advantage. As experienced miners were insufficient to meet the demand, civilians were trained and sent to war, eventually surpassing the Germans in tunnelling skills. The enlistment of many miners led to a coal shortage in October 1916, resulting in rationing. Those who refused to enlist were compelled to work as miners to boost coal production. blacksmiths and ploughmen for military service made their replacement difficult. To address this, the Women's Land Army was formed, sending 260,000 women to work on farms. Although the war ended on November 11th, 1918, it was not the last time Britain would experience war and widespread death. World War II began in 1939, not 1945, when Germany invaded Poland. Between 1945 and 1951, Britain, recovering from World War II's devastation, saw the Labour Party replace wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, despite his heroic status. The Labour Party, founded in 1900 to challenge the Conservative Party, won the 1945 election by a landslide, as many felt the Conservative government was out of touch with ordinary people's needs. Despite Churchill's wartime leadership, many doubted his peacetime suitability. During this period, the Labour Party introduced national insurance in 1946 and the NHS, National Health Service, in 1948, providing free healthcare. Nationalisation of industries such as mining, banking, gas and aviation improved worker safety. The economy eventually recovered, restoring industrial efficiency and profitability. Shortly after World War II, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union began. To support their allies, Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin offered Britain's assistance to the US. Britain also participated in the Korean War in 1950, siding with South Korea and America. In 1949, Britain became a founding member of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, established to protect against the Soviet Union, which was developing nuclear weapons. In 1947, India gained independence, marking the beginning of the British Empire's decline after centuries of territorial expansion. Between 1950 and 2000, Britain underwent significant changes. Immigration increased, class divisions ended, and the welfare state was established. With the loss of many colonies, Britain joined the European Union. The shift from manufacturing to service industries and reliance on imports led to economic challenges, including inflation and recessions. Despite these issues, the standard of living reached an all-time high. On February 6, 1952, Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne following the death of her father, King George VI, who had undergone surgery for lung cancer caused by smoking. Although he initially recovered, he died in his sleep from a coronary thrombosis. Post-West World War II, Britain faced the looming threat of the Cold War, leading to heavy defence spending. The fear of nuclear attack prompted significant investment in military preparedness. In 1956, Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalised the Suez Canal, a major blow to Britain's trade economy. In response, Britain, France and Israel invaded Egypt to regain control of the canal, facing international criticism from the United States and the Soviet Union. Under pressure from these powers and the United Nations, the UK withdrew, causing a drop in the pound's value as investors pulled out. This financial crisis highlighted Britain's need to rely on allies for military strategy post-World War II. The 1960s ushered in an era of liberation and expression, with cultural shifts towards new art forms, experimental music, and innovative fashion. This period of anti-conservatism moved away from traditional institutions, further reducing class divides. Reforms addressed issues such as abortion, divorce, sexual orientation, and racial discrimination, previously considered taboo. Despite cultural advancements, Britain faced one of its worst economic downturns. Excessive defence and import spending, coupled with inadequate industrial investment, led to job losses and declining profits. In the 1960s, tensions between Unionists and Republicans in Northern Ireland escalated into open conflict. Unionists wished to remain part of the United Kingdom, while Republicans sought independence and a united Ireland. In 1969, Britain deployed its army to Northern Ireland to suppress the violence, which provoked violent reprisals from the Irish Republican Army, IRA. The conflict intensified in 1972 with Bloody Sunday, when 14 Irish Catholics were killed during a march. This incident further inflamed tensions, leading Britain to assume control of the Northern Ireland government, a measure intended to be temporary, but which lasted 35 years. Efforts to share power between the two factions failed, resulting in renewed violence in 1974. The 1970s saw a dramatic increase in oil prices as countries nationalised their industries, severely impacting the British economy. This economic crisis led to widespread union strikes and the Labour Party, under Margaret Thatcher, coming to power. Thatcher's government implemented monetarist policies, making significant cuts to public spending, which led to widespread job losses and the 1981 riots, driven by youth discontent over poor employment prospects and perceived discrimination against the black community. In 1982, Argentina seized the Falklands, a British territory. Thatcher's successful campaign to reclaim the islands temporarily boosted her popularity. By the mid-1980s, privatisation was in full swing, allowing more Britons to invest in shares and increasing government profits. In 1985, the Irish Republic recognised Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, although internal conflicts continued. As the new millennium approached and the digital age emerged, the British Empire dissolved, with many former territories gaining independence. Britain joined the European Union to strengthen its economy and trade, a decision that polarised public opinion. This eventually led to the 2016 Brexit referendum, where the majority voted to leave the EU. Following the death of Queen Elizabeth II on September 8, 2022, after an unprecedented 70-year reign, the United Kingdom entered a new era. In 2023, the country faces an energy crisis while striving to mitigate the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Throughout its remarkable history, the United Kingdom has made significant contributions to the world in areas such as industry, culture, literature, film, television, music, and theatre. These contributions continue to inspire many nations. Perhaps the most impactful legacy is the English language itself, now a universal language that unites cultures, economies, and nations globally. And with that, our journey is at an end. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned something new. For more historical content like this, make sure to subscribe, and as always, sleep well.